Peter Parker, Grayson by Wolfong. Suggested by DSMP 1244. Peter Parker first appeared in Gotham 3 months ago. He had no ID or any record of him. It was as if he had just suddenly appeared. He was also scrawny looking and malnourished, especially for his age. Babs was the first to see him. He went to the city library and looked up several names, civilian and superhero, seemingly anyway, that didn't exist. It definitely struck her as odd. He then researched all he could about Gotham right until the library was closing. Dick first saw him around the same time as Spider-Man first appeared. He, Tim, Steph and Harper were volunteering at one of the shelters. Peter was one of the residents of said shelter, and before he even got in line for food, he took one look at Dick and scurried away. The next day they found Peter had moved on. Then they didn't hear about him for quite some time. The bats would have thought nothing of it had it not been for the fact that Peter looked eerily similar to Dick, which a few of them wrote off as a coincidence at first. When they saw him again at the shelter, it was like he was actively trying to avoid the oldest bat son. Tim once asked him why, and the kid shrugged, saying, "He just reminds me of someone I used to know, that's all." From then on, they all seriously began to panic, thinking that Dick had a secret child or clone. Most of them started keeping tabs on him in their vigilante forms. Dick, Jason and Duke did the most. Through that, they learned he was from New York, had no family left, had a seriously high metabolism, and had some metahuman abilities and some terrible self-preservation skills. Speaking of, Nightwing just arrived at the roof of the abandoned firehouse the kid was staying at. Peter wasn't there like he usually was, so the vigilante went inside. There, he found the teen on the floor, in the middle of passing out. His eyes were fluttering shut, his breathing appeared shallow, and he wasn't shivering. That was not good, especially since it was the middle of winter. "Peter?" Nightwing inquired as he rushed over to him. The next thing he did was check for a pulse. It was weak. Then he rubbed the kid's sternum in an attempt to get him alert, but then realised his skin was cold to the touch. "Peter, come on, stay awake." Dad?" Peter said groggily as he looked up at the man. Dick blinked for a second as air caught itself in his throat, unsure of how to really respond. Then Peter started going into a state of unconsciousness. No, stay with me," the vigilante told him. Peter groaned, but it was barely audible. What worried Dick the most was that it was most likely his body was shutting down, that he was hypothermic. "Agent A," the man proposed over comlink. "Prep the medbay, please. I'm taking someone in with severe hypothermia." If Alfred did respond, the man didn't hear it as he became preoccupied with Peter's safety and well-being. "You know it was a risk taking him here, don't you?" Batman stated as he approached him. They stood in the Batcave a few feet away from the medbay. Alfred had covered Peter with a warm blanket and a dry compress. Some warm saline was travelling through him from an IV. The boy seemed stable enough for now. All he had to do was wake up. Meanwhile, Tim was analysing his blood. This teen's identity had become one of the coffee-addicted hero's new side projects. Since the internet had gotten both him and Babs nowhere, he couldn't wait to see for himself Peter's DNA. "I know, B," Dick told him, "but I couldn't take him to a hospital. CPS and metahuman traffickers would be on him in seconds." He placed his hands on his hips. "He needs help. Besides, what if he really is related to me? What then?" Bruce glanced over at Tim working at the back computer and said, "I guess we'll see." He then looked at his wristwatch, studied his son's expressions, sighed, and added, "It's late. Standing around and worrying isn't going to help him much. You should get some sleep. That includes you too, Tim. The program will still run while you're away. Alfred and I will monitor him for the time being." With an exasperated sigh, Tim relented. "Fine," the young adult said as he grabbed his coffee and followed them into the manor. As the two of them made their way to their respective rooms, Tim noticed the expression on his big brother's face. Worried? He asked. Dick paused, wondering if he should even say this. He called me Dad before he lost consciousness. Uh-huh, the younger vigilante nodded, taking in the information. So what? You for sure had a secret child none of us knew about. Does that include you? I guess. We won't know until those DNA results come in, or unless he wakes up and tells us. True, the younger brother sighed. Before going to bed, he texted Jason about Peter's location in case he wanted to check in on the kid later. The guy texted back asking to be kept updated. Batman was the last to turn in for the night. Tim got down to the Batcave early the next morning, hoping for some results. He made himself coffee and went to the Bat computer. What he saw was definitely interesting to say the least. He did some research to double-check some things before finally being ready to show the others. They showed up wearing their vigilante gear, no doubt something Bruce strongly suggested as a precaution against Peter, even though the little hellspawn would have done so anyway. With a coffee mug in his hands, Tim told Dick, Damien and Bruce. So, technically, genetically speaking, Peter isn't a meta. He's more of a mutate. There's a large concentration of radioactive spider venom in his blood, or really, a mix of different spider venom and a lot of radiation. I might even say he has some percentage of spider DNA. He took a sip of his coffee as he pressed some keys. Now, since spiders are known to enter a slowdown state under a rock somewhere in winter, maybe that's what his body was trying to do. It's as if he couldn't thermoregulate. Dick's brows creased slightly, and he asked, But wouldn't his high metabolism, radioactivity, or even a well-made jacket or thermo be able to keep his temperature stable? Normally, yeah, if you aren't living on the streets of Gotham strapped for cash. Dick sighed, studying the floor for a moment. They've been trying for a while now to get Peter to stay at shelters more often. The teen was always stubborn, however, not accepting help easily. He kept them all at a distance, almost as though he was trying to protect them from something. He then found himself looking at the results of the screen. Spider DNA, huh? Just what exactly happened to this kid? Who did this to Peter? Then a thought came to him. Hey, you don't think Peter could be Spider-Man, do you? Grayson suggested. It's definitely possible, Tim replied. That would certainly explain some things. Spider-Man first debuted in Gotham 2 months ago. Like Peter, no one could really tell where he came from, aside, of course, from the New York accent. That was all they could tell about his origins. He does a lot of things differently in Gotham. The dude mostly patrols Crime Alley, helping out the little guy, as he likes to put it. Everyone can see that real, significant positive change in that area was starting to become a reality. Honestly, Jason's glad for it. They also know that Spider-Man is, at least perceived to be, a meta, able to stick to walls, have a kind of precognition, super strength, accelerated healing, and super agility. 2 of those powers he for sure has in common with Peter. And that abandoned firehouse Peter lives in is in Crime Alley. Speaking of, Dick was currently considering asking Jason to head to that place and look for the Spider-Man suit. Hey guys, how's it going? Duke asked as he wandered up to them. He was almost all suited up, with his helmet in his hands. He had a shift today, patrolling the streets of Gotham as the city's daytime hero. He then noticed what was on screen and stated, Whoa, whose is that? Peter's, Tim replied. Dick brought him into medbay last night. Hypothermia. Huh. He shifted his weight, coming to the same conclusion as the oldest Robin. Well, is he a genetic match to Dick? I'm so glad you asked, Tim stated before pulling those results up. He's not a 100% match, so we could potentially rule out clones, unless this is a kind of Connor Kent situation. He is, however, at most a 50% match. At most? Dick wondered out loud. Who's the other parent? Bruce questioned before anyone else got the chance to. A woman named Mary Fitzpatrick. The acrobatic vigilante blinked a few times. Oh great. Grayson stated sarcastically. So, someone I've never met. That makes complete sense. Yeah, well, we haven't gotten to the real kicker, Drake commented. Which is? Duke inquired, unsure if he even wanted to know. She's dead. Died in a plane crash over the Pacific Ocean. He pulled up the news article so they could see for themselves. Dick's mouth hung agape. So, what the actual fuck was going on here? Tim could already tell this was going to be a hectic day, and the rest of Gotham's vigilante brigade aren't even here yet, and most likely won't be until late afternoon. He could be a test tube baby, Duke suggested. I guess, Tim responded. He's a liability is what he is, Damien stated matter-of-factly, with his arms crossed. You shouldn't have brought him to the cave. Dr. Tompkins would have been better suited to take care of him. He's right, unfortunately. But you know what? Yeah, well, he's here now, so... The older brother trailed off. He huffed and stood there for a moment before deciding. I'm gonna go check on him. I'll come with you, Duke declared in a positive tone. Peter would be waking up in an unfamiliar place. It'd do him some good to see at least 2 familiar faces. Besides, the kid is fun to talk to. Peter woke up feeling warm, which is odd, right? He lives in a place without heating. Why would it be warm? And why does it feel like he wasn't at the firehouse? What has his Peter luck gotten him into this time? His spider senses, as he finally began to call them, saying Peter Tingle over and over was getting more than weird, were also going off. It wasn't a feeling of danger necessarily, just caution, which didn't make him any less suspicious of his current circumstances. The scent of sterile equipment hit him. He found a heavy and warm blanket over him, as well as a heat compress, and an IV in his arm. He then realised he was in some kind of medical facility. Slowly, he sat up, wondering exactly how long he's been here. He rubbed his eyes and stretched a little. He then took the IV out and got to his feet. Should he have done that? Probably not. But if this place wasn't some bad guy research facility, he would rather find out for himself. Slowly, he got out of bed, bracing himself against the cot. Once he was sure he could stand on his own, he began to wander. Peter felt thankful for his fast healing. Outside of the room he was in, he found himself to be in some kind of expansive cave. There were tons of vehicles, costumes, gadgets and trophies. What else would he call the odd objects strewn about, stored there? Among everything, he found the collection of trophies the most strange. What's up with the giant penny? Scratch that. Why was a literal dinosaur in this cave? It's not alive, is it? He stared at it for a full minute before realising that it wasn't moving and was likely not real. Phew. Hearing some voices approach, he quickly flipped off of the platform and used his web shooters, which, apparently, whoever had brought him here had failed to notice, or they most likely would have been taken off, assuming they were bad guys, to hide in a place more shrouded in shadows. There were 2 of them, walking towards the medbay. They weren't wearing lab coats or anything villain-like, which was a relief, but they did appear to be vigilantes, Nightwing and Signal to be exact. Does this mean he's wandering around the Batcave, which a lot of Gothamites were unsure was even real? It does, right? Unless he was in some other superhero base the public doesn't know about. That would be so cool. Peter quietly swung his way along the top of the cave, hoping to spot an exit somewhere. What he ran into, however, was bats. Literal balls of flying fur. He tried to not disturb them, but that didn't work for long. "Hey Bee!" shouted Nightwing, sounding concerned. "Peter's gone!" And now he's been found out. The shock made him slightly miscalculate where to next whip his web, and the tiny terrors sprung into action, flying away. Peter fell, but not before catching himself on the railings of one of the higher platforms. Yes, it made a noise, which probably meant Nightwing, Signal, and whoever else was here was probably starting to rush towards him. Quickly, he swung towards a lower platform. Then, he ran and flipped onto another platform, lower and more shrouded in shadows. He kept on moving, trying to find an exit he could easily slip through. However, he soon realised that he would not be possible any time soon. His spidey senses told him to duck. He did, and found a sword newly wedged into the wall next to him. "Halt! Mutate!" shouted Robin as he lunged for him. Peter got out of his way, but that unfortunately meant the guy had access to his sword. Actually, guy sounds weird in this context. Child? Little man? Kid? Anyways, the kid was now swinging his sword at him. Does he not have chill pills? After Peter evaded him a few times, he webbed Robin's sword-wielding hand to the railing. That should keep him occupied for at least a minute or two. Peter kept running and swinging until the brightest light possible shined down upon him, disrupting his senses. He lost his rhythm and fell back onto another platform against the rock wall. Before he could get up, his exits were blocked by Nightwing and Signal. If Nightwing didn't have such long hair, he'd look more similar to Peter's father, Richard Parker. Peter doesn't remember much about his father, but what he did recall was evident in Grayson. From the moment he met the man, he noticed the similarities, from the smile right down to his handwriting, and yes, that included the voice. The voice was how he was able to figure out who Nightwing was weeks ago. "Hey Pete," Nightwing spoke. "What are you doing out and about?" Geez, he definitely still sounded like Richard Parker. "You expect me to wake up in an unfamiliar place and not be at least a little suspicious?" Peter questioned. His eyes looked past the vigilantes and found Robin standing a few feet away from them, menacingly, with his sword at the ready. "Well, with that attitude, I'm still surprised you aren't actually from Gotham," Signal stated. "You should still be in bed," the black and blue hero pointed out. "What are you, my dad?" Peter questioned. The teen immediately regretted it, feeling how uncomfortable both vigilantes were. Hell, he was uncomfortable. "Don't answer that," he looked away, embarrassed. "Listen, kid," Signal stated after a few seconds. "You're recovering from severe hypothermia. Don't blame us for wondering about your well-being." "Well, I heal fast. You know that, so maybe don't," he suggested with a shrug. "And another thing. And I'm not a kid. Actually," he gestured towards Signal, "I can't be much younger than you, can I?" Signal was about to cut in when the older vigilante cut in. "How about we just go back to the infirmary and talk, okay?" None of them budged an inch. They all just stood around for a few seconds, wondering what the other was going to do. Finally, Peter sighed and said, "Okay." The three of them took some stairs and began walking back. Robin trailed behind. "So, is this the actual Batcave?" Peter questioned, small traces of awe still present in his voice. "Yep," Signal replied. "Don't worry, we were all as shocked as you are when we first saw it." So, Dick began once they were back in the med bay. "A few things. Not that he seemed to know how exactly to bring them up. I guess we should start with the elephant in the room." Peter sat down on the cot. Duke ushered Damien out of the room as much as he could, to give both Peter and Dick some space. The two vigilantes ended up perching themselves right outside the infirmary. "You know how you called me Dad when I was checking on you last night?" Dick questioned. No, actually," Peter told him with slightly scrunched brows. "I don't remember that at all." "Must be hypothermic brain fog." "Well, you did," Dick stated. "And it turns out you share around 50% of your DNA with me." He then took his mask off. "My name is Dick Grayson, and you are my son." Peter would say something if his brain wasn't kicking into overdrive, but oh my god, 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 oh no. First of all, how dare they take samples of his DNA without his knowledge or consent? Second of all, what does he do now? There is no plausible deniability anymore, not that he really needed it. Every time he looked at this man, he saw his father's face. However, he can't pretend anymore that that isn't real. In this universe, his father wasn't dead. Peter covered his face with his hands, in thought, but Nightwing clocked the mix of emotions written all over his facial features. "You knew, didn't you?" the vigilante asked. Peter took in one large breath and slowly exhaled before telling him, "Yes, and I've known about your civilian identity, and probably almost everyone else's, for a while now." Dick huffed out a small laugh and a smile, because of course his son would have figured that out. "But," the teen began before trailing off. "But?" the man prompted. Peter exhaled again. With his hands semi-clasped together, he requested, "Promise not to think I'm crazy." Dick blinked a few times. "I promise," he said in a serious tone. "I'm from an alternative reality," the teen said carefully. "You're an alternative version of my dad, but in my reality, you're dead. Both you and Mom are dead." His voice became a little shaky. He could feel tears welling up in his eyes. "I was, for the most part, raised by my aunt and uncle, although they're both gone too now." He took a small moment. "And I don't really want to get into it right now, but I can't go back, and don't really have anything to go back to." He looked up at Dick Grayson with pleading eyes, begging him not to ask any questions. The adult in question remembered to breathe, and took a moment to absorb everything he just heard. Then he said, "Okay, yeah, no, I can accept that pretty easily, actually." He nodded to himself. "That settles it then." "Settles what?" Parker tilted his head slightly. "I was going to ask you eventually anyway," Dick said with a shrug, "but this just solidifies it." Before Peter got the chance to ask him what he was talking about, the guy put a hand on the kid's arm and said, "Peter, would you like to live with me, or here at the mansion, or—" "I can't burden you guys like that." He had an unsure expression. "You wouldn't be burdening any of us, Peter. As far as we're concerned, you're family. You can't live in that firehouse forever. I know it's a big change, but you literally almost died. Let us do this for you. Let us help, please." They stared at each other for another long moment, full of concoctions of feelings present in their expressions. "I will promise to try," Peter told him, after thinking it over a little. "That's all we can really ask for," his dad, "that kind of sounds weird," replied. "So, what happens now? Why don't I properly introduce you to those that are here and to everyone else when they get here?" "I'd like that," Peter said, as his father, that still sounded weird, led him out of the med bay. "Where is the mansion, anyway?" "Oh, just upstairs," he said nonchalantly and dismissively. "What?" Thank you for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely day.